Okay, I think now that it's 11, and I think more people will stream in as we're opening up, but I think we can welcome everyone to the second webinar in the new UH Alumni Getting the Job series. For those of you who are just joining us this week, my name's Laura Wood. I'm an Associate Director of Alumni Relations at UH. We had an excellent response to our last webinar. Thank you to those of you who tuned in. I'm so happy to see we have some good numbers for this one too. So the Getting the Job series is hosted by the UH Office of Alumni Relations, and it consists of 2 webinars. So we had one last week about creating an impressionable resume and cover letter, and this week we'll be hearing about how to best prepare for the job interview. And both times we'll be hearing from UH alumni experts in hiring and human resources. So just quickly about the Office of Alumni Relations, the projects we produce always have the intent of spotlighting members of our alumni community, their stories, their expertise, their accomplishments. And the university really does produce leaders and experts here in Hawaii and all over the world. And it's our office's job to celebrate them and spotlight them. So this series is no exception. And we're so fortunate to have leading experts in HR as part of our UH alumni community, like today's speaker. So quickly before I introduce Sunshine, a little bit of virtual housekeeping. This session is being recorded and it will be made available to you afterwards. We'll have the Q&A function at the bottom of Zoom open. So if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please drop it in the Q&A, and we will get to all the questions at the end during kind of a conclusion Q&A portion. For those of you who submitted questions during the time of registration, we've read those and we'll do our best to answer all the questions by the end of the webinar, including those. Further ado, I would like to introduce everyone to our featured speaker today, Sunshine Topping. Thank you so much for being with us. Sunshine is the Senior VP of Human Resources at Hawaii Pacific Health, has over 20 years in strategic HR leadership, many of which have been with the state's largest companies, including Hawaiian Telecom, Hawaiian Airlines, and served in Governor Neil Abercrombie's cabinet as the state Director of Human Resources. So Sunshine's particularly passionate about finding and growing opportunities for locals to be able to stay in Hawaii with competitive wages and fulfilling careers. She took classes at UH Manoa. Both her father and husband are UH Manoa faculty staff, so a UH family through and through, which we love to see. So I'm so pleased you're here with us today, Sunshine. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. And I just want to check, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Good.
You're a little in the shadows. If you may be able to turn towards the light a little bit so we can see your. Hey, there you are.
Some serious backlighting.
There you are. No, that's great.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I really appreciate. I'm very flattered to be asked to participate in this. And yes, my name is really Sunshine Topping, and I find many people are confused by that. I was given Sunshine and then I married Topping. And yes, my husband works at UH and he's a graduate of the electrical engineering department. And then my father-in-law was a professor at UH for, I think, 40 years. We even got him a brick that's down there somewhere as Donald Topping. Yeah, so it's really, it's kind of neat. It's kind of fun.
That's great.
We're very connected, of course, to the school, and then that's where I attended graduate school. So I'm really happy to be talking to you guys, and I'm really happy to be talking about this topic. And, you know, not to put kind of a damper on this, but I realize that a lot of people are finding themselves in a position where they're having to look for work when they haven't had to do that maybe in a long time. We've spent the last 10 years, I sit on the Workforce Development Committee for the state, and we've spent so many years working on how do we find good people and how do we find qualified people and how do we grow qualified people to fill our open roles. And suddenly, overnight, we went from 2% unemployment to 30% unemployment, honestly, I think within a couple of weeks. And I know that that number's kind of come down, and I know that that number is going to bounce around for a while with the pandemic. But, you know, hiring in Hawaii is extremely cyclical. Hiring around the nation is extremely cyclical. And my heart goes out, and I just want to send a lot of aloha for people who are finding themselves right now in a situation where they're having to interview and apply and go through these things that maybe they thought they would not have to do again. And so I'm hoping that this will help. I have a really anemic set of pretty crappy slides. Laura fixed some of them, but but I didn't
Look
have
better
much
than you think.
because really you can Google this stuff and find information and look at YouTube videos and stuff about how to interview. And what I just kind of wanted to share with you in my years of HR, my years of recruitment and interviewing people was more actual interviews that I've experienced, just to
Mhm,
show in practice what we're kind of talking about. So
mhm.
um, I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to be a resource for you. If you have questions afterwards, you know, you can send them to Laura and I'll try to get to as many as I can. But I thought maybe I would just kind of jump in a little bit more about my background. I'm from Hilo, a town called Kilkaha, Hawaiian Homes, near the airport. I never had an interest in a business career. I don't know that I thought a whole lot about a career in general. So I just sort of naturally came into HR about 25 years ago, and I've just been in it ever since. I'm a total HR geek, so sometimes I'll use lingo. If you need clarification, please let me know. I do present to a lot of groups, but a lot of the groups are human resource groups. So I'm going to try to not make assumptions on what your understandings are of the things that I'm talking about. So if you do have questions, please let me know. And if not, I'm going to kind of jump in. Let me share my screen. Let's hope technology does not let us down here.
It's been great. And while you pull that up, I'm actually going to turn my video off so that I am not a
Okay.
distraction at all. And during your presentation, I'll be monitoring the Q&A. Please use it, everyone, if you do have questions. And then I'll hop on at the end to do that Q&A portion. So I'll pass you the mic now, Sunshine. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And are you all seeing my screen?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay. Zoom is so weird. I tell you, these meetings, I've done so many virtual meetings now, and the weirdness of like waiting to the minute that it starts, you're always kind of sitting there at that 59-minute point, wondering what's going on. Okay, so again, this is part of the UH alumni webinar season or series on getting the job. And what I'm focusing on right now is kind of the interview process and really pitching yourself during the interview and making it memorable. So my first slide, I want to talk about do your homework. And I think Laura and I were discussing prior to this about maybe a subtitle, which would be do your homework and don't be creepy. And I'll go into a little bit more about what I mean by that. But you know, if you get an opportunity to interview somewhere, if you've applied somewhere, um, make sure that you know a little bit about the company. And today you have so many ways to find that, right? You can go on LinkedIn and you can just Google the company name. And if you're applying for a job in marketing, you could Google marketing at the company name and at least see a list of people, get a sense for who works there, how long people work there, what the turnover rates are like. Um, you know, you could get basic information on just about any company through LinkedIn, through Google, social media. A lot of companies have pretty active Facebook uh, presentations. They have pretty active Instagram now. I know a lot of them tweet a lot. So really kind of get a sense for who the company is through those channels. We're in such a position of being able to get so much information that, and I'm going to give you an example. I interviewed, and granted it was for an internship this summer. And you know, Hawaii Pacific Health is a company. We're one of the we're I think we are the largest employer in Hawaii, but between us and Queens, which is funny, it's two healthcare companies, and probably Hawaiian Air, or largest private employer, I should say. The state's remarkably larger, um, but we have Kapiolani Hospital, Wilcox Hospital on Kauai, Straub Hospital, Polimomi Hospital. We have several clinics and medical groups and physician groups. And so one of the candidates that I was interviewing for an internship, I asked, oh, you know, what do you know about our company? And she said, well, I know you guys care a lot about health in the community. And I thought, okay, you know, how do you think we kind of do that? And she didn't know. And then I realized I don't think she even knew that we have hospitals or that we're a healthcare system or I think there was so little background information. And for me as a recruiter, as a person who's in the hiring position, if there are a lot of people who want the job and they're interested enough to do their homework and get some history, that tells me the level of interest. If they just show up and they have no idea what to talk about or who we are, then that shows me they're just not that interested, right? So within probably 5 minutes of that interview, I knew that wasn't going to work for that person. Um, I think another important reason to kind of do your homework is to get a sense of the culture of the company so that when you show up for the interview, you look appropriate. And what I mean by that is don't always show up in a suit. I think if you're applying for a kind of dynamic startup company in Kaka'ako and you show up looking like you're about to go to court and present a case, I mean, it's hard to say because people do dress a little bit nicer now, but I think for the most part, what the interviewers are thinking is, wow, this person has the wrong assumption of what this company is. Um, and maybe it won't be a fit, and then at the same time, don't show up for an interview for a company like Hawaii Pacific Health wearing jeans and a tank top. I mean, this stuff is super basic, and I feel like I'm kind of insulting you just telling you this, but I think it's really important that you kind of have a sense for the culture because we're in Hawaii and Hawaii is such a small, I feel like a small community. You probably know people who work where you're going. Talk to them and ask them, here's the people I'm interviewing with. What do you think they look for? What do you think they're going to want to see? Should I gel my hair and spike it, or should I smooth it down? And I mean, just little things like that. Those little things are things that we do notice, I think, when you come in. Um, I used to handle the recruitment for flight attendants at Hawaiian Airlines and all the positions, but flight attendants in general, I think was one place where I think people would miss the mark quite a bit and show up for an interview with very short, tight clothing, right? And I think had they done some research and asked around, they would know that's definitely not what the interview panel was looking for. It's not a modeling gig. It's not a body contest, and so you could easily just discount probably half of the people in the room in a group interview because of the way they dressed and the way that they showed up. So again, just be really mindful of where you're interviewing and try to find out what they're looking for and what kind of culture they have. Um, know a little bit about public financial information, shareholder information, know a little bit about the people who are going to be interviewing you. If you can research and if a lot of times the person who's scheduling the interview is going to tell you, oh, you're going to be interviewing with these people. They'll give you the names, they'll give you the department. Just go on LinkedIn really quickly. I was sharing with Laura, I've had a lot of people have said, oh, I saw maybe a magazine article or something that you were involved in, or I was at a panel you spoke at, and that's always really flattering. I like that. Um, and it just shows that they did pay attention and kind of went a little extra. I did have one person a couple of years ago tell me, oh yeah, I follow your daughter on Instagram. She's a great surfer. And it's true, my daughter's a competitive surfer. She has quite a big um, Instagram following, but at the same time, this was a guy and my daughter was a 14-year-old girl. And I thought, what? Why would you one follow my 14-year-old daughter and two tell me about it? So that's where the do your homework but don't be creepy part kind of comes in. And just make sure that you're not stalking your interviewer and that you're actually just doing a little bit of light research. But again, get to know who are the company's competitors, right? If you go to interview at Hawaiian Telecom, know that Spectrum has a lot of market as well, and that get a sense of how that has shifted over the years and kind of what some of our challenges would be. The more information that you have without being obnoxious with it, I think the better off you are and the better you're kind of positioning yourself to impress people during the interview. I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide. And this one is in all caps and dark lettering because it's so important. Be nice to everybody, everyone in the process. The recruiter who first calls you and screens you, um, be nice to them. When they're trying to schedule an interview, be as accommodating as you possibly can. Because especially now, a few months ago when our unemployment levels were so low and we really had all these positions to fill, we would have to kind of accept things that we wouldn't ordinarily accept in an interview because maybe we don't have as many candidates. Well, I'm going to tell you right now, we have a lot of candidates. So you're going to want to stand out, and you're going to want to stand out through your behaviors. People are looking for people who they're going to enjoy working with. And so if you get a call and somebody, pre-screens you, you answer your questions, and they say, okay, we want to schedule an interview. What I really like is if somebody says, if a candidate says, okay, the only times I can't do it over the next week are this date and this date, to to be really accommodating with the schedule, move other things out of the way, because on the company side, when we're trying to schedule an interview, it's literally like Jenga. I mean, it's like putting puzzle pieces together to get people together whose schedules are crazy and trying to fit all these pieces together to get that interview time. So the more accommodating you can be, I think with Zoom now and these different methods of, we're not really calling people in to physically interview face to face. There's a little bit more flexibility. The interview could take place over several Zoom sessions or something, but just try really hard to be really accommodating with the interviewer. Um, okay, so I wrote parking lot attendant and valet. And the reason I added that is I have in the past gotten feedback from the parking company about someone being rude to them during an interview. They've actually, we set up a mechanism, and I'll talk about that in a second, but I have actually gotten feedback where they said, oh yeah, the person was such a jerk, and they kept saying, and they said they were gonna blast through the gates and all these things. So I mean, when I say everybody involved in the process, it just would behoove you to think about they're wondering what you'd be like to work with. Um, the person who checks you in. And so this one for me, I'm going to say 15, well, probably 20 years ago, I worked in a technology company that actually started at UH. It was ad tech, and fabulous company, just an amazing company. And I had an interview come in, and I was newer in my career, and I interviewed this person. I thought the person was great. So I went into the kitchen, and two of the receptionists were kind of not gossiping, but just kind of complaining about how rude the person I had just interviewed was. And so I kind of stopped them and said, "Oh, wait, are you talking about so and so?" And they were like, oh, it's okay, never mind. And I said, no, seriously, like, I'm curious, what happened? And the person was just really rude to them, and he was rude to somebody else who came in and asked him, oh, are you here for the interview? He was kind of competitive with them, but then when it was time to come and talk to me, he was super nice and super open. And that's when I started to think, we should set a system up where we're asking, because you're going to be nice when you're talking to the person that's making a decision about whether or not you're going to move to the next level. But we want to know what you're like when you're not on, right? When you're not kind of performing. And so that's when we had a close relationship. The parking attendants actually did work for the company too. So they were part of the feedback, and we kind of just included everybody in that conversation. And one thing I even asked the receptionist who did the check-in to kind of keep an eye on how are people acting even in the waiting room? How do they interact with others and things like that? And the feedback we would really take into account. So again, just be really, really conscious of that. When I went at Hawaiian Airlines, we used to do group interviews. And I'll probably use Hawaiian Airlines quite a bit in this conversation because we had a really solid system that we set up, because the volume of people applying for the roles was so high. And we really needed to come up with a lot of ways to kind of slim that pack down. And so it would be almost more of a critical interview concept, because there were 5,000 excellent candidates for 100 jobs, and we had to figure out how to kind of get to that 100 people. Um, And so at Hawaiian Airlines, we did the same thing. And what we ended up doing was we'd have these check-in sheets. And when people would come to check in, the people who were doing the check-ins would actually make notations, very friendly, very rude, accommodating, open. They'd put like a smiley face for someone who was nice. They'd say, this person was brushing their hair in the waiting room and putting lipstick on and using the window for, so as much information, a lot of times companies really do look for information for more than just that interview period. And so I think it's really important that you're aware of that. If you're in a group interview, for instance, and this is another thing that we did quite a lot of at Hawaiian Airlines, and we will be doing, we hold some too at Hawaii Pacific Health, and then for the state too. When you're in a group interview, a lot of times it's probably on a level of most awkward to least awkward. I would say it's like most awkward plus to interview in a room with maybe 15 or 20 people and try to figure out a way to stand out is very, very awkward. One thing that we would look at, we'd have a panel set up during the interview, and one person on the panel would really just be watching how the other people in the group react to the people who are speaking. Are they being respectful? Are they looking at them and being engaged in their conversation? Are they being rude? How involved are they in the other people's answers? And we'd even look at that. And I don't tell you this to make you paranoid. I just tell you this because if you're in a competitive recruitment situation, these are some tools that I think can help you in the long run. Because really, and again, I've said this a few times, if people want to work with you, there's a higher likelihood you're going to get the job. And so people are always kind of on the lookout for those characteristics. And so the more gracious you are, one thing that I really like, and I've even done in the past, after a job interview, I'll go back to the receptionist, because usually you have to pass them on the way back out or ask for your parking validation or something like that. I'll just say, oh, thank you so much. You've just been, thank you so much for being so helpful. You made me more comfortable before I went into my interview, even if it's not really true. I find that people like to feel special and they like to feel like they've helped. So, even if you could say something like that, like, oh, thanks, I was so nervous when I checked in and you were so friendly, it really made me feel a little better. People love that. And people will come back to the interviewer usually and say, oh, I really liked Sunshine. She was really friendly. And of course, I usually have to explain the extreme weirdness of my name at every interview. Hopefully none of you have to kind of go through that. Okay, so that's be nice to everyone. The next one, very serious, very important. Answer like you mean it. And of course, I gave you some kind of guidelines here to use clear, concise answers to questions, make your answers thoughtful, let your answers showcase your knowledge. Those are do's. Try to do that. Don't use monosyllabic answers. And a lot of times, interviewers will ask questions that they shouldn't do this, but it happens a lot, that really the answer would just be a yes or a no or a maybe. And so take it on yourself a little bit to expand on that. So if the question is, did you like where you worked, or do you like where you work now? Like, well, yes, I do, and here's why, right? So because you don't want to be in a situation where your interview is a half hour long and within 5 minutes it's over and they're asking if you have any questions, right? So a lot of times the interviewers aren't seasoned at it and they're not practiced at it. And so they'll do things that would lead you to a narrow answer. And so try to find a way to expand on those answers, even if that's the case. Please don't sound coached. Don't come off as slick or insincere. Like I said, it's great to do homework. It's really weird, and I had this a lot where somebody will say, oh, well, I know your 9 company values are these following things. And I mean, don't just Google the company and reiterate everything that's on our website, right? And I realize that this sounds a little bit confusing because I just said do your homework. And I do think doing your homework and having a sense is really good, but don't just regurgitate my website to me, because that feels coached and it feels inauthentic. And you really want to be able to show the interviewers who you really are. And I think that that's hard to do if you're just coming across as a slick, kind of trained interviewee, then we can't really connect to you. And there is a question about connectedness that I'm going to get to later, but um, we want to be able to get to know you. And I think if you come off as slick or coached, we just don't really get the sense that that was really who you are and who you'd be every day. Um, don't, please don't be negative towards your current employer or anything else. I cannot overstate that if the minute you start saying negative things about where you work, there's a few things you have to take into consideration. One, this is a very small town. There's a chance my spouse works there, my child works there, my mom, my auntie works there. So be careful, because I may know who you're talking about. The interviewer may know who you're talking about. So that's one. That's one reason. That doesn't pertain to all hiring nationwide, but certainly in Hawaii, where like I myself have 8 siblings, um, a bajillion cousins. Um, you could really lead yourself down a path that will definitely not get you the job right away, just because we'll be starting to think, okay, I know where you work, I know somebody who works there, are they talking about this person? And so you just don't want to get into that. If you want to leave an opportunity, I think for me, one of the best answers that I've gotten when I've said, why do you want to leave your current company, if you can answer that question where you're looking at trying something new. So you're not saying you're trying to run away or leave your current environment. It's just that the opportunity that you're seeing at this other company is really, really something that you want. Again, so you're kind of changing the narrative. You're not saying, well, it's not that I want to leave the job I'm in now. I really enjoy the job. Here's some of the things about my current position that I really find fulfilling. Um, that to me is such a great answer, but in this new position, some of the things that I see, I really feel like I could grow into this. I really always wanted to be in the healthcare industry or whatever it is. Try to focus on the positives of the job you're interviewing for, as opposed to the negatives of the job you have now, even if you absolutely hate your job now. It just comes across as, again, if you're thinking of who do I want to work with, do I want to work with the person that I know talks really, really bad about their coworkers? Or do I want to work with somebody who's positive for the most part, all the time? And so to me, if you can flip it from being negative towards where you're at and saying, I want to leave where I'm at, and change that narrative to say, I really am interested in this role. It's not that I want to leave where I'm at, it's that this role just is something I've always wanted, right? So find a way to make that part of your answer. I think that's really, really helpful. I wanted to give you an example of interviews, and I'm sorry because I'm going to read some of this off because I kind of wrote it up for this, and I want, because I want, again, you to have an example of what, as a recruiter or as somebody who interviews people, I would look for in an answer. So a question, I just came up with a generic question. Do you have any experience working with an HRIS? And an HRIS is a human resource information system. It's just basically the tool that you use to manage all the employee data. So if I ask in an interview, do you have any experience working with an HRIS? A bad answer is yes. When I was in an IT department, the company had an HRIS and I had to troubleshoot. Right? I mean, that's an answer. It tells me you did it, but it doesn't give me much information. A good answer is yes. When I used to work in IT, we supported the human resource department. They had a Lawson system, and I used to do troubleshooting on the Lawson system. Okay, that's a good answer. Now I know that you know at least one brand of an HRIS. I understand what your involvement was in the HRIS, so that's a good answer. But a great answer would be, yes, when I was in the IT department at this company, I helped to support their HR department. They had PeopleSoft version 9 and decided to migrate to Workday. The migration required these levels of support. I was involved in the project management team. It involved setting up testing and tandem systems for 3 months. And, here's some of the things I really learned from that experience. And it's really shown me that I really prefer supporting a cloud-based HRIS versus a physical server-based HRIS. And so that last answer gave me so much more information that I can use. And especially, if you understand that in many cases, the first couple of rounds of interviews, the people that you're talking to might not even really understand the job they're interviewing you for. So the more information you're giving them, and they can look at their job description and see the keywords of HRIS, they see Lawson, they see Workday, they see words that they know the position requires, they're going to score you higher, right? So the more detail and the more detailed information you can give on answers, particularly in the screening part of the interview, in the beginning, when you're understanding that there's a chance that the person who's interviewing you doesn't understand it at all. I mean, I did recruitment for high-tech companies for hyperspectral imaging systems, and I was interviewing PhDs in physics, and I had no clue what I was asking. And so what I would do is look at the words that were keywords that were in the job description. And as people would talk to those words, I would just assume, okay, we're moving this person on. So know in your head that there might be a chance that the person that you're talking to doesn't fully understand the role. And so as long as you're looking at your job description and understanding what the job description requires, and you're speaking to those points in the job description, it really helps the interviewer make the determination to say, okay, I think this person is good, is going to pass the pre-screen, and is going to be able to move on to the next level. I think that's really important. Another example of kind of good and bad answers, one that we used a lot for the flight attendants, right? So a bad answer to us was, why do you want to be a flight attendant? I love to travel and I want free flights, because kind of that's mostly, I think, was what most people wanted out of the job, but that, that's what everybody would say. And I think, okay, how does that make you any different from the other 4,999 people here? A good answer, why do you want to be a flight attendant? I'm adventurous and I love to experience other countries and cultures. I really enjoy traveling. I enjoy trying new things. I can't picture myself working a 9-to-5 job. This just seems like it would offer me the flexibility and the experiences that I would like. That's a pretty good answer, right? I like that. That kind of hits to what we're looking for. But then to me, a great answer would be, I'm passionate about providing a great customer service experience. I'm also passionate about our Hawaiian culture. I want to be the first representative of Hawaii that a passenger sees in New York or Beijing. Well, we're not doing Beijing anymore, but in Fukuoka or California, Los Angeles, or, I want to be the first piece of Hawaii that somebody sees. And I want to ensure that they get a true example of what our Aloha spirit is. I realize that in many cases, these people have been saving all of their lives for this trip. And I want to make sure that they feel like they're getting the value and that we're really putting ourselves in the best light possible. Okay, that's a great answer. That person, based on that answer, would probably just get the job. Eventually, there's many steps, but still, those are the kind of answers, because what you've just shown me is that you understand the job, right? It's not just glamorous. You understand that there's a lot of people on the plane who aren't seasoned travelers. You understand that it's not just about traveling and having these great experiences, but it's about creating an experience for a potential customer. So to me, if you're looking at different versions and options for answers, something that shows who you are and what your passions are and is able to tie that back to what the job is, it just makes it much easier for an interviewer to say, okay, this person gets it, and this person is definitely understanding who we are and what the job is like, and I want to move them to the next level. And so to me, this area of how you answer interviews is probably one of the most critical pieces that you should focus on. One thing that I recommend people is practice. Before the interview, just practice. And you can assume there's going to be a lot of, you can guess what the questions are going to be, right? They vary, and there's a variety, and people are going much more behavioral based questions and things like that. But for the most part, people are going to want to know your strengths, right? So practice how you're going to talk about your strengths. Practice how you're going to talk about your strengths. And of course, because we're in Hawaii and because of our culture, we don't really like to brag, but you got to kind of brag a little bit, right? So find a way to share what your strengths are without seeming like you're overwhelming, right? So practice what your strengths are. And let me tell you, if I ask you what your weakness is, please be honest. Give a weakness. Don't say, oh, well, my real weakness. And I can't tell you, 9 times out of 10, I swear to you, this is the answer. Well, my real weakness is I just work too hard. Okay. Okay. I'm not even going to try to pretend that I think that's a weakness. And I don't know that that's, that's a very sincere answer. Right. So for me, I'll be honest with you guys, my weakness is I'm not detail oriented. Right. So that could be a real deal breaker if I was applying to be a nurse. And so for me, when I say, my weakness is that I'm not detail oriented. And over the years, I've learned to accommodate for that through these different things that I do now. Right. So that becomes an answer where I'm actually being honest. The interviewer knows I'm being honest. And again, the interviewer now is getting a better sense of who I am, um, and who I really am and how I'm going to work. And I think we all appreciate authenticity. We all appreciate people being real about who they are. So please, the following are not considered weaknesses: working too hard, being too passionate about your work. Those, just please don't say those. I'm just to give you a heads up. I could have a whole other list, and if you feel that you want to check things by me, but make sure that a weakness is actually a weakness. Because that, again, that can be kind of frustrating. And another thing, when I'm talking about how you answer interview questions, I kind of digress here, but many years ago, I was media trained, and not because I'm any type of spokesperson, just so you know. It just happened to be I was an executive and in the governor's cabinet, and we had to be media trained. And part of the media training is that when the media is coming at you with a bunch of questions, you in your mind know what the message is that you want to convey, and you stick to that message, right? So in the interview environment, it's very different. And and we always used to laugh about the people who seemed media trained. Listen to the question and please answer the question. So don't try to answer my question with a point that you're trying to get across, right? When I feel like, as an interviewer, and especially when you're at the level where you're interviewing with your potential boss or manager or coworkers, you don't want to look like you're someone who doesn't listen and is just trying to get your own perspective over. Listen to the questions. You can even say, in fact, I actually appreciate when someone says, I'm sorry, can I just have a second to think about that answer? I love that, because that means that they're really thinking and they're really going to come up with an answer that's a valuable and reasonable answer. So please listen to the questions and respond to the questions. Don't sound like you've been media trained, because I think that makes it a really difficult. In our case, afterwards we'll be like, I have no idea, this person just didn't answer the questions. All they had was an agenda they wanted to push, and that's all they talked about. So be really mindful of that. Be really mindful. Even if there's things you want to say in an interview, find a way to say them so that they make sense while you're still answering the questions that are being asked. Okay, so the next one, salary, to discuss or not to discuss. Okay, so I put some very specific things in here. I know it's a really, really awkward situation, awkward discussion. I got to be honest, I've interviewed thousands of people, and it's never not awkward to talk about salary. And so what I did is I gave you a couple of examples of things that I kind of like and don't like. So, I mean, I think a good answer, if it comes up and the interviewer says, what's your salary requirement? And I don't know that it would come up. Usually that comes up in pre-screening, and I'll talk to that a little bit more in a second. But a good answer is, I'm flexible. I understand that the salary is probably already set, and here's what I'm making now, right? I really like to know, because If I have a job that pays 60,000 a year and you tell me you make 120,000, the interview is kind of already over. Um, the interviewer, and I'm going to tell you, companies as a whole have very strict salary ranges, and there's a ton of analysis that goes into how you build the compensation and the compensable factors that are used to build it. So if you spend the rest of the interview trying to convince me that you're worth 120,000, and in my mind I'm thinking this interview's over because the most this position could possibly pay is 65,000, that makes you not a candidate. If for some reason you're making $120,000 a year and you tell me it's not about the money for me, it's about me looking at a new direction for my career, it's about me wanting to try something different, and I'm still okay with that salary, I understand what it is and I understand what I would give up, but it's worth it to me, that kind of conversation can continue. But don't have in your mind an expectation of a significantly higher number than the job pays, because those rates are set. For the most part, there's very little flexibility there. Um, uh, Another favorite answer is, in order to consider this opportunity, I would need to make this much money. I think that's super fair. I think if somebody, you know, has a budget, has a family, has a bill, or not family, has bills, has things they need, and they say, you know what, I can't take a job for less than 80,000. As an interviewer, I at least appreciate that refreshing honesty. And I could say, you know what, this position pays 65,000 and it can't go any higher. I'm so sorry. Do you still want to consider it? And sometimes people will say no, and I appreciate that. And especially because later, if the $80,000 position comes up, I'll remember that person. And I'll think, well, okay, this is a manager level position now. So I'm going to call that person who I really liked, but we couldn't pay the amount that they were requiring. And so we do that. We'll take notes and we'll remember stuff like that. Um, and again, my least favorite answer is when candidates try to negotiate the salary when it's a huge disparity. It's not, I don't know. I've never worked in an environment, and maybe there are other environments like this, but I've never worked in an environment where I had that kind of flexibility on a salary. So it almost becomes kind of an obnoxious and uncomfortable, go nowhere kind of circular conversation, because that's just not the place for it. Okay, next slide, because I'm talking way too much, sorry. At the wrap up of the interview, ask a couple of questions that you're honestly curious about, not just to show off, right? And everyone probably has been experienced, whether you're in a class, whether you're in a business meeting, where you always have at least one or two people in the room that just ask questions to show how smart they are. Please don't do that in the interviews. I mean, it's a little bit off-putting, I think. But ask questions that you're really curious about. Some questions I love is when somebody says, what does a typical day look like in this role? Because to me, they're not glamorizing the position. They're trying to get a realistic set. I come in, do I check email first? Do I have meetings? What are my responsibilities? I really like that question because I feel like it's asked in a way that people are really trying to picture themselves in that role. Another one, if it's with the manager, how do you define success in this role? And what that tells me is, here's an employee that wants to do a good job and wants to know what it means to do a good job. So I really, really like that question a lot. Don't overstay your welcome. Notice signs that the interview is over. Please don't start talking about things that the employer could get in a lot of trouble for talking about. Don't ask about religious interests, about political interests, about if they have children, about how they feel about children in the workplace. People who are interviewing are usually really nervous about not getting into that territory because that's illegal stuff. And so try not to lead your interviewer into a place where they feel trapped or afraid, because not everybody's super savvy about staying out of those conversations. And it's hard because it's Hawaii, right? So if the interviewee says, oh, I think I know you because our kids play softball together, well, that's terrific. That's a great way to connect with the interviewer. That's a great way to make a connection. But don't tell the interviewer, oh, by the way, I have 3 children. I just want to let you know, right? Because that puts them in an awkward position. Ask for the next steps. Oh, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. When are you looking to fill this position, and what are kind of your next steps, right? So that way the people can tell that you're interested. They can share with you the process. I think that's a really nice question. And thank the interviewer for their time. tell them how flattered you are to be considered. Tell them, summarize. So somebody had asked, how do you develop a rapport with the interviewer? That was one of the questions that came up before this section. And really, the best way to develop a rapport is to listen to them clearly and empathize with them, and then kind of summarize at the end to show that you were listening. People love to know that you are paying attention and that you value what they're saying. And so if you can somehow validate at the end, just say, I really feel for you. It sounds like this is a critical role that you really need to get filled. And I hope that you find the right candidate. I really hope it's me because I've really enjoyed this interview. But regardless, I hope you find the right candidate to help you get where you're trying to go. So those are some of that. And then that's it. Okay, so now I just am open for questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen with my very helpful slides. So I'll go ahead and do that. Is that better? Are we back? Okay.
Yes, you're back. You're
okay,
a tech
thank you,
pro
Laura.
with Zoom.
I've
Thanks
gotten
for
quite good
welcoming me
at
back.
it.
That was such an excellent presentation. I cannot overstate how helpful and great that was, even to me, who's not trying to interview anywhere. But that was so great. And we did have a few questions come in. And so I just want to bring those up if you're willing to answer a few right now.
Yes, of course.
So obviously the most popular topic, as you can expect, was salary. And so we had a couple folks who were wondering about your suggestion to say, here's what I'm making now. And I've heard that advice before in the past. And have you ever had a scenario where someone says, here's what I'm making now, and it's actually significantly lower than what the position can pay?
Yes.
I know when you and I have spoken before, you've said, as an HR professional, you want to be able to give people a good salary. That's, your goal. So have you ever encountered a scenario where someone says, oh, I make this now, and you're like, oh, maybe we can pay them lower? How do you normally navigate scenarios like that?
So I think, like I was talking about, compensation is a science, really. And people have gotten to where, you're looking at things like internal equity and why does this person make more than this person? And so there's so much analysis now that goes into compensation. It's a really analytical field now. And so we have ranges. Like I said, on the top side, they're really clear, but on the bottom too, we will not pay below the range. So if it's a $60,000 a year job and you tell me you make $40,000, as a HR person, I get really excited that I might make you an offer for $20,000 more than you make. I would never just pay you $40,000 and you're way below the median because I get audited. I have to pull reports. I have to submit reports to the federal government and the state governments and things. So we're not going to pay below our range. Again, there might be companies who do that, and I think smaller companies have less strict kind of guidelines around the ranges. But for the most part, if somebody makes less than I know I can offer, that's a very exciting thing. We want to offer HR, your managers, they honestly, I've never been in a situation where they don't want to offer the max and get you as close to what you want as they can. That's across the board. It's very rare that we want to hold down salaries just because we can, because it throws off our whole internal equity system too.
Mm-hmm. That's great to hear. I think the summary of that is to trust your interviewer and trust, the places that you're applying. And I think especially folks from my generation, I think don't always have that mindset and are a little more cynical about, that going in. So that's really good to hear. That's really excellent.
It could happen, but I'm going to be honest, in all the places I've worked in the last 25 years, the ranges are, if nothing else, they're more and more solid. And with some of the Lilly Ledbetter and some of these pay acts and stuff, it does not benefit a company to save $10,000 on salary with the high risk of trying to justify why you paid this person less than everybody else. It's just it's not even smart business practice.
Right. Great answer. Thank you so much. On the topic of honesty and trusting, I really appreciate that you talked about the strengths and weaknesses thing, because I know when I talk to friends or fellow coworkers, we've brought up, like, how do you answer that? How do you say this is my biggest weakness? Because that's not what you want to talk about. So I have a question. One, why does a place ask that question? I'm just out of curiosity. And then two, how, I know you said that, be as honest as you can, but how honest can you be in that without,
That's a good question.
just
I thought
making
about
yourself
that
look really bad?
afterwards. So, so be as honest as you can. If your weakness is like an addiction to drugs or alcohol, I
Oh,
wouldn't share
okay.
that maybe.
Professional
Or
weakness.
if your weakness is that you really just steal people's work and like to claim it as your own, don't share that. Get some help, obviously, in either case, but don't share that. But be honest. Like my weakness, I think, is bad. I am not detail oriented. That's problematic. I work in business. I work at, there's a lot of detail. And so when I share that weakness, I realize there's a risk, but I also, the reason companies ask that really is one, to get a sense of who you are. Again, we're just trying to figure out who you are and to get a sense of, how you're going to fit in the environment that you work in. So if I were to pretend that I am detail oriented and I go into a job as a data analyst, that's the wrong pick, right? For me, I won't be comfortable in that job and the company won't be comfortable with me. But so I know what my weakness is, and it can be something that, yeah, it's a weakness, but it's surmountable. And I've already come up with systems to overcome that weakness. And I say, yes, my weakness is that I'm not detail oriented. And here are things that I've done to overcome that, right? So if your weakness is, say your weakness is you're intolerant of people who take too long to maybe, I feel like sometimes I get frustrated with people who take too long to understand a concept. But what I've learned over the years is to have empathy for those people and to realize we all learn things at a different pace. That's a great answer. I would like that answer. My weakness is that I'm not a morning person. And so the way I've accounted for that is I set 4 alarms and I force myself to do these things. And then it's cute. And then it's a conversation. We know everybody has a weakness. I wouldn't put your worst weakness out there, but I would put something where you identify, you're self-aware, and you have systems in place to overcome that. That's to me, that's a great answer, and it helps me know you. And then as we're working, I can be like, okay, Laura, no offense, I'm not going to give you this project because I know it's going to stress you out because it's so detail oriented, and I realize that's not really your strength, but can you help me with this other project? So it kind of opens up a relationship already and a conversation with you and your potential employer.
Right. It's all about getting to know someone. That's why you're asking that question. And I think sometimes that question gets really scary for folks because they don't want to be too forthcoming. They don't want to eliminate themselves. And so they end up just choosing something.
Yeah.
Right. And so they end up just choosing something off a list. They Google, what should I say for this? And then it doesn't become personal anymore. And so
seriously, I think the strengths couched as weaknesses, that's the most frustrating. I'm a workaholic. I'm too dependable. It's like, okay.
And that's what folks want to be able to say. So I think your process of saying something that's genuine and then following it up with, here's how I've been able to manage it in the past, still personalizes the answer, so you know that they didn't just Google, what should I say for this question? So that's a really great answer. Thank you. One big question, we had someone ask this, and I think a lot of folks are curious about this, seeing as we're doing a Zoom webinar right now. Obviously, a lot of interviews are going to be pivoting towards virtual interviews on Zoom, Skype, whatever. Do you have any tips or any suggestions for folks who might be navigating that for the first time?
Yes, and I'm going to tell you something, and I'm sorry, I'm going to use profanity just now.
That's okay.
So please plug your ears.
We'll censor you in the recording.
I was on a Zoom meeting the other day with a vendor who's, we spend billions of dollars with this product, and they were getting on, and you could hear like this, and all of a sudden it just goes, I'm so sick of this shit. Okay, so please know when you're on mute and when you're not on mute. So it was such a weird, and then one of our executives said, whoever's using profanity, you may want to mute your mic. So I've heard toilets flush. People just call it. So, make sure that you are real clear, practice early. So with Laura and I for today's webinar, it started at 11. We called in at 10:30 because there's so many possible technical problems that can happen. And we see it all the time. be prepared. Practice with a friend if you can. If you know someone, send them the link. Try, you know, send them a Zoom interview. Practice with them. Make sure the lighting's fine. Make sure, you know, you're not like this, or you know, we have we have one coworker, and it's always, the Zoom thing is like from here to here, like it's like his shirt generally.
Nice.
And so make sure that it's set up right. Make sure that you've practiced. Make sure that when you're practicing with someone, you're making sure that they can hear clearly. um, if you have dogs, if you have chickens, if you have kids that might run around and come in, um, just kind of let everybody know what you're doing and set that stage. We do have some people who get really irritated by dogs barking or by
Mm,
animals outside. And so if you have a room that can be the quietest room, that can maybe have AC on, that has as few distractions as possible. I mean, I was in a meeting with somebody, and their shirtless husband just kept walking through the back of the interview. It was the weirdest thing. And I thought, didn't she just say, I'm going to be interviewing for a job? Don't come in the room. You know, so make sure that anything in your environment that you can control for, you have. Make
mhm.
sure. And
Yep.
honestly, everybody laughs about the shorts, you know, business on top and party on the bottom or whatever. But for real, you never know when you might have to stand up. And you want to make sure, at least for an interview, your full outfit is okay. Because we've had situations like that too, where somebody stands up and you're like, oh, they're wearing shorts with a blazer, you know. So I think the things that you can control for, and again, practice. Start early, get your friends to help, enlist people, because the most irritating thing for someone who's on a busy schedule is 10 minutes of trying to get Zoom to work, or trying to
Yep.
get Skype or whatever it is. So
Mhm.
that's the best advice I can give on that one.
No, that's really excellent advice, and I agree with all of it. And we actually we have this one-page worksheet. I actually think I sent it to you, Sunshine,
Yeah,
ahead of
yeah.
this, but the online presentation tips. And if anyone watching wants that, just let me know, and I'll send that over to you. It's a nice little comprehensive guide. But we do have time for a few more questions, so I will try to get to everyone. There might be a few that we don't get to, but we had a question that is really honest and really excellent. What do you do when you just don't have a good answer to a question? Someone asks you something and you weren't expecting it, or you just don't have experience in that area. Do you have any recommendations for that, especially for folks who might be going into the interview process for the first time?
Yes, I've had that come up even for myself as an interviewee. But I've had in many situations where I've asked a question, and I'll see people fishing for an answer while they're talking. You can kind of see them trying to make it
Mm-hmm.
make sense. Like I said, one thing I like is if people go, wow, that's a really good question. I got to think about that for a second. I hope that's okay. And
Mm-hmm.
I understand. I go, oh, yeah, absolutely. Or to even say, you know, I can't think of an answer right now. I might just be nervous, you know. Can we come back to this question later, or can I
Mm-hmm.
send you the answer? Because I don't want to just waste your time making something up. You know, I really want to give
Right.
it some thought. People like to be flattered, really. So if you say, wow, that's such a good question, I didn't even anticipate it, but I really appreciate why you're asking it. I just can't think right now of a good answer for that. Or if it's not just that you can't think of it, and it's just that you don't have one, you don't have that experience, you don't have that background, to just be really honest, you know, no, I have no experience working with an HRIS. I'm so sorry, but I have worked with an applicant tracking system, which I think is similar in these ways, right? So if you can't answer the question, let them know that you can't answer that specific question, but here's some
Mm-hmm.
other information that's similar that I want to share with you. But again, if you just tell people, wow, that's a great question, and honestly, I don't want to just make an answer up to it because I feel like it's a question that needs some thought. Can I get back
Mm-hmm.
to you? That's
Mm-hmm.
a perfectly acceptable, that's actually kind of a valuable answer I would like.
That's great to hear. So again, about that being as authentic and genuine as possible,
Yes.
and not being coached or
Yes.
scripted or trying to come up with the right thing. You know, there isn't a right thing. There's either you have it or you don't with this thing. So that's a great answer. one thing that I've wondered about, and we did get a question about it, is about follow-up. And following up after an interview with a thank you note or an email. I've heard varying degrees of how much people have followed up, people, delivering things to homes.
Right.
Somehow they find an address, which, like you and I said, do your research, don't be creepy.
Don't be creepy. Yeah.
So any recommendations or things that you've experienced in follow-up that have been really delightful for you, or things that have said, maybe don't do that? Any suggestions?
Yeah. So follow-up note cards are always sweet. It's always like, oh, wow, that's nice. It's kind of interesting. Somebody sent, I have one right here. Somebody sent a little card. Oh, thanks for your time. I really appreciate it. I know your time's valuable, right? So that's nice. An email is always nice too. Hey, I really appreciated our conversation. Thank you so much for your time. I'm really flattered to have been given the opportunity. I hope you find the right candidate. Short, not something that requires a response, please, because in many cases, we're just not at liberty to do that. And then please understand that in many, many businesses, there's regulatory environments that don't allow us to take a gift, right? We have stark laws here for healthcare in the state. There's laws. So please don't send us something that actually puts us in an illegal position if we accept it. Don't send a $25 gift card. Hawaiian Air, it was incredible. People would send huge bouquets and all this stuff, and it was like, we can't, please don't do that. That puts me in a really bad position.
Right.
And so as sweet as it is, it actually, it makes it harder for us. So a nice note, whether it's a note card or an email, something that's not asking a question that needs to be answered, but just, hey, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And I hope no matter what, you find the right candidate. I love that when people say that.
That's great. And then, like you said, you mentioned not requiring a response. And that was a question that we received is, if you haven't received a response after your interview, I know that in past interviews that I've done, I'll eventually hear from someone saying yes or no, If you're not hearing anything, is it appropriate to reach out and say, I had this interview, however, much time ago, I really enjoyed myself, thank you again. Is there any update on your timeline? Maybe they didn't give you an answer when you first asked about timeline and you just want to follow up. Is that appropriate, or is that well received?
So the way I would do that, because that's a great question, and especially now with COVID, right? People made it to final interviews, and then we shut 500 positions down.
Right?
Yeah. So what I would recommend is that you reach out to the person who scheduled the interview, not the interviewer, but the person who did the scheduling, and then say those things, and especially if it's driven by something. So I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but if you say, I just want to make sure about the process because I'm also interviewing for another position and they're getting ready to make an offer, and I would prefer to work at your organization, but I just need to be able to make kind of an informed decision. So something like that will put your request to the top of the pile. So if we are still going through the process, then the person who scheduled the interview would reach out to me and say, hey, Sunshine, you're about to lose this candidate. Right? And then, and if you didn't get the role, then that person who scheduled the interview, who you don't have as much of a relationship with, so it's not as kind of awkward,
yeah,
reach out and just say, hey, sorry, we've actually decided to go in a different direction.
Got it. That's a great answer. That's, that's one of those, pieces of advice that we could only hear from an HR professional like you. That's one of those things you can't really Google
on behalf of all of us, because I don't know, but I just know in my experience, that's kind of how things have looked.
And thank you for that. We just went a couple minutes over, and I know I promised to release you. So thank you again so much for that. If we have any lesson questions, I know some folks we didn't quite get to your questions. Please follow up with me. You can email us at contact@uhalumni.org. Send me your questions, and I'll pull the ones that we had from the Q&A function, and I'll follow up with Sunshine, and maybe you can email me a couple of responses, and we'll get those out. So
absolutely.
Excellent. Thank you. But thank you so much for delivering that presentation. It was so great. And I'm just going to pitch to everyone else. We have another webinar on August 7th, part of the community conversation series that we have with UH Manoa Provost Michael Bruno. We'll be hearing from 2 environmental experts, Darren Lerner and McKenna Kaufman, on insights for a sustainable future, what we can learn about the climate crisis and COVID-19. So tune in if you can on August 7th. And Sunshine, thank you so much for being here. It was such a delight to hear from you. I wish we could do like a recurring podcast with you. It was so fun.
Trust me, I get very irritating after a while. But thank you all very much, and good luck to everybody. I hope everybody gets, at least something out of it. So thank you.
That's so great. Thank you so much for being here. Aloha, everyone. Thank you.
Aloha, hui hou.